Last week we began the story of Joseph. And in the middle of the story of Joseph, there's a chapter of Genesis that I skipped over, Genesis 34, because it's just crazy. And if you're following along, as we get into the second part of the story of Joseph, the second of three, you'll notice that I'm about to skip another chapter, chapter 38 of Genesis. And there are two chapters in Genesis that are just crazy, and we're about to skip the other one. 34 and now 38. If anyone wants to read them and ask me about them, I'll be confused with you. But here we go. We're just going to skip this one as well. And we pick up with Joseph. What happens after he is sold by his brothers and he is taken away to Egypt into slavery? Well, he's bought by an official in Pharaoh's court, a gentleman by the name of Potiphar. And yes, as I go through this story, I have seen the musical, and so I can't help but see these characters as they are portrayed by the Joseph in the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. So as I see Joseph hauled away, I'm seeing Donny Osmond. But he spends years there. He says, like, he's going to a land where he doesn't know the language. He doesn't know the language. He's going to Egypt, so he has to learn the language. He begins as a servant in Potiphar's household, and someone who is high up in the Egyptian hierarchy. And over time, he learns the language, he learns the culture, he takes on more responsibilities until he's running the household. And I don't think household is quite the right sense of the word. You can run a household and that be like a 800 square foot little house and it really not be, it's an endeavor, but this is a different thing. When he is running the household, it's more of an estate. He is running the land that's attached to the household, so he is overseeing farmers, a large swaths of land, and he is functioning as like a wealth manager, you might say. This is like being trained to be a combination of a farmer with thousands of acres combined with being a wealth manager with significant assets under their control. And so this is something that takes time. It's not something that Joseph would have learned back in Palestine. It takes time for him to show Potiphar that he can be trusted with all of this, as we read, that God prospers what he does, what Joseph does, and so eventually Potiphar does. And then, after a long run of doing this, Potiphar's wife accuses Joseph, of rape. And this is hard. This is really ugly. So Joseph is tossed into prison. He's not tossed into any prison, though. He is tossed into the prison for the people who are connected to the court, the people of high standing. This is not a place for hard labor. This is a place where people who might be of use to the king or the pharaoh in the future are stashed. So you don't kill them. They have earned a pharaoh's displeasure or the displeasure of someone in Pharaoh's court. What confirms this understanding of the prison situation that Joseph finds himself under is the other two people who we are told show up into this prison. We are told that Pharaoh's personal servants, the baker and the wine taster, show up. The baker is a pretty straightforward position, bake bread. But the wine taster is a position of higher real authority, or at least higher risk, because the wine taster is the person who tastes the wine to make sure it tastes good for the pharaoh. But if you taste all the wine going to the pharaoh, what you're also doing is you are testing for poison, so that if someone was going to try to poison the pharaoh, try to kill the pharaoh, that the wine taster would die first. So there's some real risk and sort of, I guess you'd say, authority, but this is someone very close to Pharaoh. And both of these people have disappointed Pharaoh, and both were sent to prison, and both have dreams. And Joseph, who knows his way around understanding dreams, as we saw in the first chunk of his story, the dreams of his brother Sheaves bowing to his, he says, I can tell you what these are. The interpretation is in God's hands, but I'll tell you what I can figure out. And his interpretations of the dreams are accurate. The baker is executed at the whim of Pharaoh, and the wine tasters return to his previous position. Joseph asks that the wine taster remember him, but he does not. And so here comes another hit that Joseph has to take. Joseph has been sold by his brothers. He's been accused of rape by Potiphar's wife, and now he's being treated like a tool. Literally, it's just a tool. When's the last time you thought about where your socket set was? You put it down there. When do you think about it next? You think about it next time you need it. You put it down, don't think about it in the time in between. And that's how the wine taster is treating him right now. I needed this tool to know I was going to get back in Pharaoh's good graces, and he puts the tool down, and he forgets about Joseph, and he forgets about Joseph for years. And so Joseph is in prison, and just like Potiphar had entrusted the running of his estate to Joseph, so Joseph is useful, and he runs the prison for years. Again, this whole story, it takes time to unfold. Joseph runs the prison for multiple years. And if you think about what he's doing, he's running an institution. He's running an organization that has staff and has supply needs, and it has to be run well. And so after these multiple years, now Joseph is called to come talk to Pharaoh, because Pharaoh has some dreams that are bothering him. And the wine taster remembers, there was a tool to interpret dreams. Let me go get you this tool that happens to be a person. And brings Joseph, and Pharaoh says to Joseph, my dream is that 7 heads of corn were eaten by 7 healthy big heads of corn were eaten by 7 scrawny heads of corn, and then 7 fat, good-looking cattle were then eaten by 7 scrawny-looking cattle. And Joseph is able to look at Pharaoh and say, and again, Joseph is an amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and I'm hearing this all with an Elvis accent. Joseph hears this, and he gives credit to God. He says, the dreams are of God, and I will listen, and I will tell you. So this is quite the change for how Joseph the dreamer, right? From the arrogance of, my dreams make me look good, to, I'll help you with the dreams if I can, to, the dreams are of God. And sort of the humility that has developed there. That he has grown greatly in humility. And he tells Pharaoh that there'll be 7 years of plenty. And then there'll be 7 years of famine. And this is what's going to happen. And Joseph adds his own part. What he says next is not in the dream. It is his response. He says, Pharaoh, I would suggest you pick someone who is discerning and wise. Someone who can harvest the crop for the next 7 years and put a lot of it aside so you can make it through the 7 that follow after that. There is nothing to indicate that Joseph is writing his own job description, just that Joseph is speaking out of his own experience. He knows how to handle such matters based on what he has learned how to do over his years of practice there in Egypt. He has been over an estate, he has managed wealth, he has managed farming, he has managed an institution. He has become the person that is needed for this moment. And Pharaoh sees this. He thinks quickly. He sees this problem. He says, here's the solution to this problem. I'd suggest this be what you do. And he gives Joseph the job, which comes with this promotion, comes with a wife, a new name, comes with authority. And this is where we pause. And we contemplate what this means for us. How do we understand this today? Well, my first question as we try to figure out what this means for us today is to ask, where's Potiphar? He still has to be around. And the Bible is unrelenting in telling about how people act when it tells us about their moral character. If Joseph had reacted and gotten even with Potiphar, or Potiphar's wife, we would know, I'm fairly certain to say, right? That's just, it's the focus of this story, right? In many ways, is about the character of Joseph. And what we see in the fact that Joseph just moves on is that the arrogant young punk who's been done wrong has grown up. He's not holding a grudge. He's focused on what is moving forward, what's in front of him. Like, remember, at this point, like, Joseph is taking these big hits, rejected by his brothers, accused of rape, treated like a tool by the wine tasters. He was used and set aside. And like, on the other side of these hits that he has taken as a person, what type of character would you expect that to have formed? Like, it would be entirely reasonable to expect that someone who's taken those type of serious hits by this point in his or her life could be someone who is bitter, distrustful, angry. Like, we could expect that. Yet he isn't, right? He just isn't. When he offers their interpretation of Pharaoh's dream, he doesn't then say, "And you're doomed. You have it coming," right? "Egypt has treated me terribly, and now you will all suffer." Or what would be far more likely is just, no, okay, he just stays silent, doesn't say anything, right? No, instead he uses what he has learned from his years of managing and leading the state, the prison, and he offers a solution, right? He uses what he has to proactively help the folks around him. What this brings to mind is what Paul writes in his 8th chapter of the letter to the church at Rome, that God can use all things for the good of those who follow him. And I think that's what we're seeing. I think this is what we saw in Paul's life, right? When Paul writes this to Rome, at that point in his life, he has been whipped, he has traveled, he has been stranded traveling by sea, he's had some things happen, he's taken some hits, and he has seen how God has used those things and how he has been able to proclaim the good news of Jesus and build churches all around the known world. Right? He can see that God has used all things in his life. And what I think we see, sort of a precursor, you might say, is where it's happening here in Joseph's life. That Joseph could stand in that moment and offer a way forward for Egypt was possible because of the things that had happened before him. Right? A way forward that would actually save his own family, we find out next week. And so I think one thing we can ponder is, how much can we experience and practice and see this in our own lives? The confidence that God can and will use all things in the end. And that because of this, we can, like Joseph and like Paul as well, see ways forward based upon this. That God can use all things for the good of those of us who follow him. And to be very clear, this is not to sugarcoat any part of what has happened in Joseph's life or in our lives. Like, to be accused of rape is horrible. A false accusation, any false accusation, is horrible. Everyone takes hits, whether what we're talking about in Joseph's life or whether it's in our own lives. We will all take hits in our life. Most of the time, they're unexpected. Hits that can be just as bad as Joseph's, and the trauma from being hurt in that way is real. And so I don't want to sugarcoat or downplay any of that, but what I want to make sure we're seeing is that what we're looking for today is a way of naming that the Lord that we follow is bigger than any hit that we will ever take, any trauma we will experience, and that who we are on the other side of the trauma, the challenges that we experience, depends how much we can hold on to the vastness, the goodness, the long-term nature of God's calling and God's plan. And that's what allows us to grapple with the temptation to turn bitter and cynical as woe is me. Or are we able to choose, like Joseph, to hold on to this hope, this faith at the end of our story is in God's hands, and that because of this we can echo Paul, proclaiming that God can and does and will use all things for the good of those who follow him, and that in the end we will be with God in the kingdom to come, when all things will come to fruition, be made right. I think there's just as much in following Jesus in who we are as there is in what we do. And that's what this part of the story of Joseph challenges us to do, It's not that we should do more or less or different. This is not some sort of burden to carry that we need to do more. No. Looking at Joseph is a reminder that who we are matters. And what we see in Joseph is someone who is able to hold on to hope, and that God can redeem what is in our past to point us towards a future that is in God's hands and will work out for the good of those of us who follow him. I hope that I and all of us who follow Jesus can hold on to this day and each day, no matter what trauma, what hits, what things might come our way. Amen.